Some medieval rulers were just bad at their jobs. Others were monsters with crowns, from incompetent tyrants who lost entire empires, to rulers who tortured thousands and called it justice. We're ranking the worst medieval kings and queens, from bad to absolutely terrifying. And trust me, by the time we hit number 1, you'll wonder how these people were ever allowed near a throne. Number 7. King John of England, 1166 to 1216. They called him a tyrant. His own nobles called him a failure. Even his dad, the legendary Henry II, thought John was the family disappointment. By the time King John took the throne of England in 1199, he was already known for being petty, paranoid, and power-hungry. And somehow things only got worse. Within a few years, he'd lost Normandy to the French, alienated nearly every major noble in the country, and crippled England's finances through relentless taxation. And when he wasn't waging disastrous wars or squeezing peasants for coin, he was starving prisoners to death, including a noblewoman and her son, locked away in Corfe Castle and left to die. But his biggest failure? He pushed his nobles so far that they revolted. In 1215, they forced him to sign the Magna Carta, not out of diplomacy, but as an ultimatum. It was the medieval equivalent of an intervention. Stop ruining the country, or else. He agreed, then immediately asked the Pope to cancel it. Even death didn't save his reputation. Chroniclers called him a man who feared not God, nor respected men. And when he lost his crown jewels in a swamp during a retreat, it felt poetic. The symbol of English monarchy, swallowed by mud, just like his legacy. Bad king, definitely. But compared to the next 6, John almost feels like a warm-up. Number 6. Queen Isabella of France, 1295 to 1358. They called her the she-wolf of France, and not without reason. Married to King Edward II of England, Isabella was no innocent pawn in medieval politics. At first, she played the dutiful queen, but behind the royal curtains, England was rotting. Edward spent more time with his male favourites than with his wife or government, and his rule was marked by incompetence and widespread resentment. Isabella waited. She watched, then she struck. In 1325, she travelled to France under the guise of diplomacy and never came back. Instead, she began raising an army with the help of her lover, Roger Mortimer. In 1326, they invaded England, overthrew Edward, and forced him to abdicate in favour of their teenage son, Edward III. But that's not where her story ends. Edward II didn't just disappear quietly. Rumours swirled that he was murdered in captivity, and the most infamous version claimed he was killed with a red-hot poker through the rectum. Historians still debate it, but the myth stuck, and Isabella's name has never really escaped the stench. She ruled England in her son's name, but in reality, Mortimer called the shots, executing rivals, hoarding wealth, and acting as if he were king. Eventually, Edward III grew up, staged a coup, executed Mortimer, and imprisoned Isabella. She lived the rest of her life in quiet luxury, but her legacy, a woman who weaponized her crown, her beauty, and her vengeance to take down a king, and nearly destroyed the monarchy in the process. And believe it or not, we're still 5 rulers away from the bottom of this royal disaster pit. Number 5. Charles VI of France, 1368 to 1422. They called him Charles the Beloved, until they started calling him Charles the Mad. At first he showed promise, a young, idealistic king who seemed ready to stabilize France after years of war. But by the time he hit his mid-20s, things took a dark turn. One day, during a military campaign, Charles suddenly attacked his own men in a blind rage, killing several before collapsing. It wasn't a one-time breakdown. It was the beginning of a lifetime of mental illness, paranoia, and terrifying delusions. At the height of his madness, Charles believed he was made of glass. He refused to let people touch him, wore reinforced clothing to protect himself from shattering, and sometimes forgot he was king entirely, needing to be reintroduced to his own wife and children. And while his mind fractured, so did France. The royal court descended into chaos. Rival factions seized power. The 100 Years' War with England worsened. And in 1415, while France was under his reign, the English obliterated the French nobility at the Battle of Agincourt. All the while, Charles drifted in and out of awareness, a puppet king with a broken mind. It's tempting to feel sympathy. Charles wasn't cruel. He was mentally ill in a time that had no concept of treatment or compassion. But the consequences were devastating. His reign tore France apart, weakened the monarchy, and nearly lost the country to foreign rule. If madness is a tragedy, then Charles VI was a walking catastrophe, and sadly the kings below him aren't just mad, they're monstrous. Number 4. King Eric of Pomerania, 1381 to 1459. He started with 3 kingdoms. He ended up with a ship and a grudge. Crowned as the ruler of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden under the Kalmar Union, King Eric of Pomerania had a rare opportunity: unite Scandinavia into a powerhouse. But instead of building an empire, he built enemies. Eric's first mistake: war without reason. He picked fights with the powerful Hanseatic League, a trading federation that basically controlled Northern Europe's economy. In retaliation, they crippled his ports, cut off trade, and turned merchants into enemies overnight. Then came the sound dues, heavy tolls Eric slapped on ships sailing through the Øresund Strait. It was supposed to boost his treasury. Instead, it sparked rebellions, enraged foreign powers, and gutted public support. Even his own people started to turn on him. Inside his courts, he ruled with arrogance and apathy. He ignored council advice, vanished for long retreats in Gotland, and grew increasingly disconnected from the chaos unraveling back home. By the 1430s, it all fell apart. Sweden revolted. Norway followed. Denmark booted him off the throne. One by one, his crowns were stripped away. And what did Eric do? He didn't retire peacefully. He turned to piracy. Yes, after losing his kingdoms, Eric of Pomerania became a pirate, raiding merchant ships from his island base, fueled by bitterness and a deep sense of royal entitlement. A king who could have united the North instead ended up robbing the very trade routes he once ruled. A failed monarch, a failed leader, and eventually, a seafaring embarrassment. But at least Eric stopped at looting ships. The next ruler executed his closest allies, based on horoscopes. Number 3. King John II of Castile, 1405 to 1454. If you thought medieval kings made bad decisions, wait until you meet the one who ruled by horoscope. King John II of Castile ascended the throne as a child and never really grew into the role. He was more poet than politician, more obsessed with tournaments and symbolism than strategy and governance. That might have been harmless, if not for the man pulling his strings, Alvaro de Luna. De Luna was John's favorite advisor, charismatic, cunning, and ruthless. He basically ran the kingdom for decades. While John spent his time writing verses and pondering the stars, De Luna was silencing opposition, reshuffling the court, and enriching himself through corruption and backdoor deals. John didn't seem to mind. After all, he consulted astrologers for everything, from political decisions to military campaigns. Plans were delayed if the stars weren't aligned. Enemies were arrested based on celestial predictions. He believed the sky dictated power, and it cost him dearly. Eventually, the nobles had enough. They pressured John into turning on the very man who had held his kingdom together. And in 1453, John ordered Alvaro de Luna executed, the man who had served him for over 30 years. It was a move that shocked even his enemies, and just a year later, John himself died, alone, despised, and without any real legacy. His reign was a masterclass in weakness, easily manipulated, politically passive, and driven more by superstition than reason. He left Castile fractured, his people disillusioned, and his own name buried under the weight of 1,000 bad omens. But at least John lived in denial. The next queen, she lived in madness and slept next to her husband's rotting corpse. Number 2. Queen Joanna of Castile, 1479 to 1555. They called her Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad, but her madness was just the beginning of her nightmare. As the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the famed monarchs who united Spain and sent Columbus across the Atlantic, Joanna was born into power. But she was never meant to rule, until her older siblings died one by one, and the crown unexpectedly fell on her head. Then she married Philip the Handsome, Archduke of Austria, and for Joanna, it was love at first sight, obsessive, overwhelming love. But Philip? He was more interested in politics and mistresses. After years of betrayal and manipulation, Philip suddenly died at age 28. And this is where Joanna's story turns dark. She refused to bury his body. Legend says she traveled across Castile with Philip's corpse in a coffin, opening it nightly to weep beside it, convinced he'd return to her. She was gripped by grief, paranoia, and possibly schizophrenia, but she was also politically dangerous. Her father, Ferdinand, declared her mentally unfit and locked her away in the convent of Tordesillas. After his death, her own son, Emperor Charles V, kept her imprisoned for the rest of her life. That's 46 years of isolation. And during all that time, Joanna was still queen in name. She signed documents. She remained a symbol, but she had no freedom, no power, and no voice. Whether she was truly mad or just a victim of ruthless men who needed her out of the way, one thing is clear. Joanna's reign was the longest royal imprisonment in European history, but as tragic as her story is, the king who takes our number 1 spot didn't just imprison people, he impaled them. Number 1. Vlad the Impaler, 1431 to 1476. They called him a hero in Wallachia and a monster everywhere else. Born into the blood-soaked politics of Eastern Europe, Vlad III, better known as Vlad the Impaler, ruled with one simple philosophy: fear is more powerful than law. His preferred punishment? Impalement, and not the quick kind. Victims were skewered on long wooden stakes, often inserted through the rear and carefully angled to avoid vital organs, so they'd die slowly over hours or even days. According to some reports, he once impaled 20,000 people in a single campaign, leaving their bodies to rot in a forest outside Targoviste as a welcome to invading Ottoman forces. It worked. The enemy turned around. But Vlad didn't just save his cruelty for outsiders. He ruled his own people with terrifying brutality. He executed beggars, accused women of adultery and burned them alive, and invited boyars, nobles, to feasts, only to stab them mid-meal and impale the survivors. And yet, in his homeland, he's remembered as a defender of Christendom, a man who held the Ottomans at bay while the West barely noticed. Vlad's legacy became legend. Centuries later, Bram Stoker used his name as inspiration for Count Dracula, and it fit: blood, death, paranoia, fear. Vlad didn't just top this list because he killed people. He did it methodically, creatively, and with a gleeful disregard for humanity. He ruled not to serve, but to terrify. The worst part? It worked. These rulers weren't just bad at governing. They were dangerous, delusional, and in some cases, downright inhuman. And in the medieval world, there were no term limits, no checks and balances. If a king or queen went mad, the whole country went with them. Power wasn't earned, it was inherited, and sometimes it fell into the worst possible hands. But while these kings and queens were making life hell for their people, women in the Middle Ages were already living in it. From forced child marriages to witch trials, public humiliation to childbirth without medicine. Being a woman in medieval Europe meant surviving a system built to break you. Click the next video to see the horrific, real-life struggles medieval women faced every day.